Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K202 The Southern Lights, Episode 2 of Book 2 Spirits, and I really like this episode. It's, I think, my favourite early Book 2 episode because it's the one that helps to explain a lot of stuff later on. It's the one that really sets up the sort of spiritual arc that comes into play pretty much with beginnings and then very much going into the finale and so on. So I think this is a very important episode for the book, but it's not just about the sort of spiritual stuff that it does. I think the character moments in this episode with Korra, Tonraq, Unalaq is excellent in what they do and the development that they have. Like Korra go through, kind of Tonraq go through as well. It kind of starts his arc in a way of where it's going, and then Unalaq, of course, it's this weird episode where like you sort of begin to really trust him. Like I know he's the villain, but like he seems to be giving Korra everything she needs, and then right at the end it's like, oh, here we go. Here's where the issues are going to start to come into play. Where does he go from here? But yeah, we immediately start with the idea that they're going on a journey out to the kind of southern tundra. Unalaq explains it's basically one of the most remote parts of the world, and they're going to this old spirit portal that hasn't been opened in a very, very long time. Now, this is where a lot of people who dislike some of the lore aspects of Book 2 start to immediately bring up complaints about like, oh, these spirit portals weren't mentioned in Avatar, like this is retcon, so it's really bad. And it's just like, in this case, when you clearly see how far they go into the southern tundra, which, let's not forget, we've never really been in before, the furthest we saw was basically where Aang was, which the impression given is that like Aang isn't that far into the southern tundra. And especially knowing now that there's this giant Everstorm that effectively makes a large part of the southern tundra kind of impassable, it makes sense to a degree that like, okay, the south most heavily affected water tribe, they just wouldn't know about this kind of hidden portal that has this giant kind of ice structure sort of built around it in the middle of this kind of ever ongoing storm. Whereas up in the north, it seems that like they probably knew about it, there was no way to open it, but that they knew it was there at the very least, but they always had the kind of Tuyen Law spirit pool to act as their kind of spiritual thing that they could easily have access to. So in that sense, I don't really have too much of a problem with them introducing the spirit portals, because I feel that they do a good enough job of like, I don't think it's a criticism that they're not in Avatar, because it wasn't necessarily overly important to have them at that point in time, given, I suppose, where the plots went. But I think it's a really cool reveal, because I think they used the portals so well here to expand the overall lore of like, why are they closed? If they're just kind of naturally occurring spirit portals, shouldn't they be open? And I think they do an excellent job of explaining that as the episode progresses. Then what we, I suppose, immediately begin to get is what I love in terms of the dynamic throughout this episode. It's Korra obviously still very kind of upset about things from the previous episode, and how that's sort of piled upon in this episode with the issues she's having with her father Tonraq. And obviously he's not happy about Korra going out to the spirit portal. He thinks it's dangerous going this far into the Everstorm, and he basically demands to go with her. Initially, I think the thing that really upsets her is that he tries to basically make the decision for her, and we know that that's not the way to handle Korra at this point in time. And that's the root of the issue here. I think the biggest complaints I see about some of these very early episodes is that people is just complaining about Korra and her being very hard to take in a way in these episodes, which I agree with, except I feel those people ignore the reasons for why she is that way. I feel they oftentimes skip past the fact that this is caused by flaws, critiques about Tonraq, about Tenzin, and that explains it, that the context behind why someone is in a sort of like frustrating position is important. And I think it helps like Tenzin, it helps Tonraq that they have this clear flaw that they have to get past over the course of this book. So with Tonrock, they very clearly set it up, is that he is overprotective of Korra. It's fine that he cares about her, doesn't want her to get hurt, but very clearly his approach is that he is overly protective of her. Because you can see that, like, when Mako kind of early on in the trip is just like, okay, are you sure you have all the supplies, blah, 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 and he's kind of acting a bit worried as well. She kind of like laughs that off because she's like, okay, he just kind of cares about me. Mako's not being overprotective, he's just caring about me, whereas I think the perspective from her father is that because of the reveals from last book, because of the sort of secret that's hinted at the start of this episode and then revealed later on in the episode, she's very much not wanting basically what Tonrock is sort of presenting here, because it's the big thing of just the amount of sort of lies and things being kept from Korra, I think completely justifies her actions in this episode. Of course, I think people criticize what later on when she says, like, no, Dad, you're leaving. In that, like, yeah, that's a bit harsh, but at the same time, are you trying to excuse Tonrock of all of the lies and not telling Korra all of this stuff? Because as I mentioned in the first review for 201, like, she's the Avatar. She is the one who ultimately has to sort of be responsible for this stuff. Like, the Avatar is a sort of vague job, but it is still this kind of job. There are expectations for it. And one of them is that she has to be the bridge between the spirit world and the physical world. And it feels throughout this entire episode that Tonrock is trying to completely, like, hinder her from doing any of this. You even get that direct scene where he kind of says, I shouldn't have gone into that spirit forest, and you shouldn't be going here. And he's basically saying, like, stop doing the spirit side of your job. I'm not spiritual, you shouldn't be either, when she has to be spiritual, because she wants to be the Avatar. For one, it's not like she's being forced against her will to be spiritual. She wants to be this way because she wants to be a good Avatar. And her father is getting in the way of that because one of the key conflicts of this book is Tonrock and Unalaq, in that Unalaq is very spiritual, Tonrock is not. That's their kind of difference. And you can sort of see in a way that this sort of explains why Korra doesn't have any kind of like built-in spirituality, because her father was never spiritual, and then her mother is from the south, which is explained to be overly spiritual. So she needs someone like a Unalaq, who is deeply spiritual, to get her to this point, because Tenzin didn't have that, and she needs it. So I think they do a very good job in this episode at presenting the details to like justify like Korra's actions and how she feels throughout this, because again, like, she's just been told that like the reason her entire life up to now, like, she was basically kept in the south and not allowed to be the Avatar in the way the others were, is because of her father and Tenzin. Now she's been told that, oh, here's this other giant reveal about your father, that, yeah, you know the way he's from the north? He was actually banished from the north. And do you know why he was banished? Because he destroyed a spirit forest that basically, like, Unalaq very much kind of like points the finger as if like, Tonrock, you are responsible for like everything that's happening now. And it's not necessarily the case, because it's obviously later revealed that Unalaq has some control over the spirits and is causing some of these attacks to happen, but that the South isn't particularly spiritual, and that is like actually a core problem that does actually need to be resolved. And just the fact that Korra's like more or less 18 now at this point. She's like 17 and a half, more or less 18 at this point, and he still doesn't feel the need to tell her. And this is where it's all about like kind of Korra and like respect. Who is respecting her as the Avatar, and as she says later on in the episode, who believes in her. That scene with Unalaq later on explains, I think, everything perfectly in a line, that as she has to go on her own to open the spirit portal, she's like, I'm not spiritual, what do I even do? How am I going to do this on my own? Are you not coming in? And he's like, no, you have to do it on your own, but I believe in you. We'll talk a little bit more about the rest of that line later on, but the fact that she responds to that is just kind of like she's a bit taken aback, and she's like, I almost forgot what it is to kind of have people like believe in me and trust in me. And that's how she feels at a base level. She's frustrated because Tenzin isn't giving her that respect. Her father's not giving her that respect. And she sort of feels that Mako is sort of like struggling on that line between is he being overprotective and maybe not trusting in me or not? And I think she realizes that at a base level, Mako does just care about her and isn't being overly protective like those two are, because as we'll get into when Raiko comes into play, it's no one's really respecting Korra as the Avatar. And while yes, she's young and she's not in like an official role of power or anything like that, I think she deserves a level of respect as the Avatar, that her opinion matters to some degree. And that's where she's frustrated in, is that Tenzin isn't giving her the respect as the Avatar, Tonraq isn't, they're not telling her about these reports about the spirits. Her father's kind of like actively seemingly trying to hinder her from becoming spiritual. And the only one who seems like he's trying to get her to that point is Unalaq. So Unalaq plays on this situation that, yes, he himself sort of creates to a degree. And the fact that he is manipulating her is like a factor in this. But that before the full-on reveal of him being a villain comes out, he gets Korra to a point where she is actually very spiritual, and it sets up her development as like the season progresses, with beginnings and then going into the finale where she truly becomes like a very, very spiritual person and makes these kind of connections. And it comes from the fact that she has to sort of, in a way, go on this journey on her own. She has to sort of be so frustrated by the people around her that she almost gets herself sort of into this sort of isolated position. And it's sort of where the Mako Korra relationship, I think they make a huge mistake, which we'll get to when we get to the breakup. I think they make a mistake with that. Instead of like, okay, Mako and Korra break up, and we use them being separate to develop them, to have them come back together stronger as a couple because they've had development away from each other, and then we can kind of progress from here. But instead they use it as a way to just like forever just separate Korra and Mako as a couple without really explaining like why. And I think it's an ultimate weakness, because Mako is a kind of important character to Korra in these like first two episodes at the very least, because he is the one that she sort of comes back to as like she's telling her like true feelings to about all of this. And like by the end of the episode she apologizes to him for being a pain and just says that, you know, it's tough being the Avatar with all of this stuff going on, it's so stressful, but I apologize for being a pain, because she was sort of taking it out on him and he's understanding of that here. But then later on they kind of have a scene where they're just not understanding of it, and it just feels like it sort of comes out of nowhere when the first two episodes lead you to believe that there's actually a really deep connection between the two, and it just gets forgotten over time for, I think, very little reason, very little gain, and it's just weird to me how it actually plays out. The other factor I suppose we have in this episode is Bolin, Eska and Desna come along, because Bolin has one of Varric's kind of snowmobiles. There's not too much on them in this episode. You know, they have a few jokes of just like Bolin not understanding the full technology stuff, Eska and Desna with their weird personalities, and Eska sort of being interested in Bolin but not making it like super clear, and then acting like oddly like angry when he's like hugs Korra when she comes back, and it's like, okay, are we actually in a relationship or not? And like it's fun and interesting, but obviously as we'll discuss as that progresses, that relationship, it's kind of weirdly paced in that they get it to a point by the end where you really care about the two of them, but it's really clear that the stuff from before just like you can't forget about, like the way they actually approached doing it earlier on. So like there's a few nice moments. It sort of gets across a little bit without showing too much that Eska and Desna are actually like pretty powerful waterbenders with just the skills that they have and what they're able to do. But obviously pretty much very soon after this point, that's when we get the reveal about what Tonrock did in the past. And I think it's a really cool backstory because it includes Unalaq, and obviously we'll get a little more of this later on. I think Tonrock and Senna talk to Korra about this in one of the upcoming episodes. Um, but I really like this because, as I said, it's Unalaq's flashback as well, and it starts to do this really interesting thing of like, this is the start of like a bunch of different reveals that are going to come out with Unalaq that kind of explain a lot of the factors that have kind of been in play up to now. And here it's like a kind of, from Tonrock's perspective, what happened in the past with this incident. And he's a general in the Northern Water Tribe army. Barbarians attack. He kind of scares them off, but then pursues them into this spirit forest and ends up destroying it, trying to capture these barbarians. And this seemingly turns the spirits against him. They attack the Northern Water Tribe, and if not for Unalaq coming into play, the tribe could have potentially been destroyed. And Unalaq's able to spirit purify them with the spirit bending. And what happens is that Tonrock gets banished, and that leaves the space for Unalaq to be left to become the next leader of the tribe, which is obviously, like, later on when the reveal comes out that Unalaq kind of orchestrated this, it makes complete sense in that I think as we progress, we see that Tonrock's actually a very good leader, and I think the usual kind of Water Tribe mentality, like, I think it's very clear Tonrock was absolutely set up to be the next chief of the Northern Water Tribe, but this event happened, and he feels like it's kind of one of his failures that this happened. But it still doesn't really prompt him to become more spiritual. He just goes to the south and settles down and just kind of lives his life the way he does, but he kind of dislikes his brother, I suppose, for over time taking the position. And I suppose as we'll get into a little later on, more with book 3, clearly I think part of the issue as well, why Tonrock is so anti like Unalaq being involved in Korra's life, is because he knows kind of from before, I think it's definitely hinted at, that Unalaq, when she was younger, made attempts to, I suppose, be more heavily involved in her life once she was discovered to be the Avatar, which he sort of repelled away because of their issues. But it works because it kind of, it explains obviously why he's down in the south, why like Korra doesn't really know much about the north. But it also explains perfectly, like, it's almost a more interesting backstory for Unalaq because it explains like how he's the leader. It explains, I suppose, why he's so respected in the north in a way for like saving the tribe apparently. But obviously it's clear that he controlled the spirits, he hired the barbarians, orchestrated this whole thing, and that's why he has power now. But obviously we'll discuss as the series progresses all of the other sort of important aspects with Unalaq's kind of backstory, like the Red Lotus stuff that I think retroactively I think adds extra layers to this book, because obviously he's the one who ordered the Red Lotus attack when Korra was younger, which is the kind of true reason for why Korra was actually like kept in the Southern Water Tribe. So it's this interesting situation where the reason Unalaq has that as kind of leverage to sort of use against Tenzin and Unalaq and Tonrock in the first episode is because he's the one who fundamentally caused that to happen. He ordered that attack and let the Red Lotus go to prison over it, and he obviously saw the results of that. And it's because obviously he's a part of the Red Lotus. He wanted Korra to be, trained as a kind of Red Lotus member in a way. So that's always a really kind of cool aspect of the kind of backstory that kind of plays into things. But I suppose we pretty much after that get to the Southern Lights and Korra actually opening it. It's a cool sequence because like there's dark spirits in there. There's a cool fight as you see kind of Korra progress into the center, and this idea of like there's just ice that she can't even like firebend through. So she has to make that spiritual connection, go Avatar state, and kind of touch it to open it in the last moment. And it's a really kind of gorgeous animation scene because just the way the lights come out, and you get this amazing shot as like Mako and Bolin, everyone on the outside sees this happen. Then they do, I think, the really positive thing in this episode, which is that they cut out to Tonrock on his way home. He sees the Southern Lights go up, turns around and is like proud. Like, it's this proud moment of like, she did it. Like, I didn't expect it to happen or anything like that. And it shows, I think that's a scene that proves that he had doubts about what this was if this would happen or not, if Korra was spiritual enough to do it. And he's honestly sort of shocked, surprised, but also proud that she did do it. And it's this moment where he's sort of like proven wrong. And as the episodes progress, we'll see that he sort of gives Korra a little bit more leeway going forward. He's not as overly protective. And I think after this point begins to respect her more. And then I suppose on the other side of the episode, we have Jinora jump into the spotlight with this episode, which for me is a huge positive for this book. How they managed to turn her from being just this very minor character, just the bookworm air kid basically, who got like a couple of cool lines and maybe one cool moment in episode 10, but now they suddenly jump her into the spotlight as being like, oh wow, does she have like a cool, amazing spiritual connection? They're in the Hall of Avatars. She has that really nice moment where she sees the statue of Aang. They play the cool music, and it's meant to, I suppose, just be this kind of fun connection moment of just like, she's never met Aang before. She's obviously, I assume, has seen pictures of him, but this statue in the Hall of Avatars, it sort of becomes, I suppose, fully clear to her like how important her grandfather was in everything that happened. But then suddenly spiritual connections, she's drawn to something on the other side of the room. Then when Korra opens the spirit portal, she's kind of drawn back into the Hall of Avatars and comes to this one statue that's glowing, this different one kind of made out of wood, and it's like, what is this? Who is this? It's obviously, as we learn later, the first Avatar, Avatar 1, and I think it's just a really cool thing to just establish Jinora has this really, really strong spiritual connection, which is going to be developed over the next couple of episodes. And it sets her up into this very important position that ultimately is a really strong development arc for Tenzin, for Jinora, and for Korra, which is, I think, primarily what episode 9 is about. Which is another very good episode, and then 10 as well is very good with the kind of Jinora stuff. So I think they do a great job of like, Jinora's not like overused in this book, like she doesn't become like fully main cast member as such, but she suddenly like leaps up the tier list in a way. And I think it's very, very impressive how they do this, and they make her equally important in book 3. Unfortunately, they sort of dropped her out of the spotlight a little bit in book 4 when I feel that she needed some of those big moments. But this as her kind of big setup moment, I think is very, very well done. Because it's just this cool setup of like, what is that statue? What's this connection with Jinora and the Avatars? Even just the fact that Jinora is spiritual is actually a reveal of this episode. And I suppose it really starts to come out once we get the reveal that Tenzin isn't very spiritual himself, and that really helps to explain a bit more about this. But obviously we have episodes coming up where we'll address the spirituality aspect a little bit more. Earlier on in the episode we had obviously the family's arrival at the Air Temple, which was a fun moment of just the respect all of the Air Acolytes have for Tenzin and his family, because they're the airbending family. Especially them giving like the flowers to Pema and just being like, you know, you are now a super respected person within airbender culture because like you are the mother of like new airbenders for like the first time in so long. And then that moment of like, oh, here's the issue with Kaya and Boomy. There's a lot of people out there who don't know that Aang has kids other than Tenzin because they're not airbenders. There's the issue immediately, and it makes sense. It's obvious that like Katara and Aang, celebrity couple, the kind of future of airbending in a way depends on them. in a way, the world would only care all that much about them having an airbender child, and not so much if they had a non-bender or if they had a waterbender. And the issue is suddenly made clear. Tenzin was sort of focused upon a little bit more. And we'll get into that as the episodes progress, but I thought it was a fun way of just showing that without needing to involve Tenzin just yet. Just that kind of Air Acolyte woman not being aware of this fact, and then being like shocked, but to the audience it's being like, oh, this makes complete sense now that we know some details about the like Aang Katara's family. But yeah, we'll get more on that in the next two episodes. The side plots in 3 and 4 with Tenzin are actually really good. But I suppose coming back to some final thoughts on the other side of the episode. Southern Lights are back. Kind of Korra has a real heroic moment coming back from this, and as much I think as like people will say that she was manipulated into opening the portals and it was part of Unalaq's plan, it also I think plays nicely into the ending of the book and the decision Korra makes to keep the portals open, in that when she opened the portal there's a direct sort of positive change on the world, in that the South isn't spiritual, that's a fact. Unalaq isn't just making that up. It should be a benefit to a degree that the Southern Lights are back. That to a degree this sort of gets rid of the Everstorm in a way. That it creates a level of kind of peace within an aspect of the South that wasn't there anymore. And so there's a benefit to that, and she sees the benefit, and she kind of feels like she can make progress now as the Avatar because she's made this spiritual connection. She's found the light in the dark, which that line from Unalaq is so important because it's like a theme of the book. That there's a lot of darkness coming up, but there's always that little bit of light to find, and it becomes so important in the final episode. They even quote it again, and it's just this idea that even though Unalaq is manipulating Korra at this point in time, the lessons he's teaching her before he fully reveals how like evil he is get through to her in a way where it explains how Korra then has the perspective to make the decisions she makes come the end of the book, in that she can see the positives and negatives of Unalaq's perspective on spirituality, the portals and so on, and can see the positives, and she feels that she has a way to do some of those positives without having to bring in some of the negative aspects of it. So I really like how they do this, because Unalaq is actually a very interesting character. I'll never say he's like a charismatic character or like just interesting in the way he says everything. In that sense, he is sort of like a sort of boring character because he's just this very spiritual man who cares about the world being spiritual, deeply cares about the spirits, and seemingly at this point in time cares about Korra becoming spiritual. And like, that's obviously different than the crazy mystery that surrounds Amon, how sort of brutal the Red Lotus are, and how kind of calculating and just confident Kuvira is. Unalaq is just like, he has his spirituality, and that's like, I think it's different enough that I'm okay with them just having a villain who doesn't have to be this crazy charismatic like leader like all the others are. He's just someone who happens to be the leader of both tribes, isn't overly charismatic, but his spirituality sort of defines him, and it's something that he wants to do. So that's why I like him. I'm okay with it being different than the others. But I think they managed to, even though like I think his base personality isn't overly interesting, involve him in so many interesting things by like, he's a part of the Red Lotus, and here he is manipulating Korra very effectively, using stuff that like it's later revealed he in the past has kind of caused to happen, and he plays it so well. It's just, he sort of, I suppose, underestimates what Korra can do on her own without his advice. That the idea that come the end of the book, she more or less out-spirituals him in the end, by not even being the Avatar, on her own, defeats him using the techniques that basically he led her to discovering. And that's an aspect of this episode that I think is good. She attempts in the fight against the spirits to use Unalaq's spirit bending technique, nearly gets it, but you can sort of see that the kind of helix of water that she's making is all shaky. She only just barely makes the spirit turn a little white before she's taken out, and Unalaq uses his technique again. So I like that in a way. Like, Unalaq never teaches her the technique as such. Like, we never see him just teaching her this, but it's I suppose the spiritual sort of lessons he ends up teaching her that give her better perspective on how to perform the technique. That, like, oh, there is no like evil spirit. It's light and dark. It's about the balance within a spirit, and if you can alter that balance using spirit bending, you can choose to make them more peaceful, and so on. So I think once she kind of makes that connection, you understand how she can finally use that technique like properly. But yeah, The Southern Lights is an episode I really, really enjoy. I think it does a lot for later on in the season. I love the lore aspect, and I really like the Tonrock kind of development setup of, like, he's clearly going to have to give Korra more kind of respect going forward. I like the side plot with Jinora, Tenzin, and like Kaya and Bumi. The Korra, Tonrock, Unalaq stuff is very, very, very good. And I don't feel this episode has a ton of wasted time in that they don't overly focus on like Bolin, Eska, and Desna. They only get like a scene or two, and it kind of sets it up where they have a little bit more time in the upcoming episodes to do it. And I think it just, for me, is like one of the most important episodes from the early episodes. This one's a really nice blend of spirituality, but also like the family dynamics that, like, I talked about as being the main themes of this book. But yeah, that's been the review. Thanks for watching, and bye.